Prepare yourself for something very strange.
So remember when David Benioff and D.B. Weiss were announced to be the ones developing the adaptation of The Three Body Problem? And a lot of people were concerned that this popular sci-fi book series is being adapted by the people responsible for the final seasons of Game of Thrones.
And who has a better story?
Yeah, maybe they were onto something. Now, I was giving this the benefit of the doubt because Benioff and Weiss were also the ones who brought us the fantastic earlier seasons of Game of Thrones, and seeing that they were working with a complete story in this case, I thought they might have a chance to redeem themselves after their Westeros fiasco. So, is this something that they were actually able to accomplish? Let's discuss. Three Body Problem is based on the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy by Liu Cixin, the first book of which is, you guessed it, The Three Body Problem. The series is a first contact sci-fi story. You have the unsuspecting people of Earth, you have an advanced alien civilization, you have some very strange things happening, and a bunch of scientists trying to figure out what to do about all of this. That is the most basic way to describe this first season and the first book in the series, but of course, things get a lot more complicated. We start off in 1966 during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and we follow a character, Ye Wenjie, witnessing some horrific things that undoubtedly shape her worldview. This is a timeline we keep going back to for some very important context, but the main timeline is set in 2024 in England, and at the beginning, it's almost a murder mystery because in present day, scientists are mysteriously dying or ending their lives. How are those timelines connected, and what do they have to do with an immersive virtual reality video game? Well, you'll have to watch the show to find out. I'm keeping this vague because I don't want to spoil any of the specifics for people who haven't read the books. I think the trailers already reveal a little bit too much, so if you're interested, just watch the show. And people who have read the books already know what's going on and don't need a detailed recap, although there are a lot of changes when it comes to this adaptation. A lot. So if you're a book fan, be prepared for that. But I do want to say this. I understand that changes need to be made to adapt the novels into a series, particularly a novel like The Three Body Problem that's packed with scientific theories and ideas. That's unavoidable with any adaptation, really, and I'm always open to changes if they make sense. Just know that I am not coming from a place where I think that any changes to source material are a negative by default. The other thing I want to say is that you absolutely do not need to read the books to understand what's going on in the Netflix series, because they have simplified and condensed the material significantly. So if you're generally a sci-fi fan, I don't think you will be confused. But I do hope that at the end of the day, this show will make you pick up the books or listen to the audiobooks and experience the far superior original version of this epic story. So, let's talk about the positives first. Visually, this is a great looking series, and you can definitely tell there's a serious budget and effort behind this. Yes, there are a few scenes where the CGI looks surprisingly rough, but most of them happen in a VR video game setting, so you can just write that off as VR things. But overall, I love seeing a visually impressive sci-fi series. Who doesn't? There are also a few scenes they absolutely had to get right visually and dramatically for the story to be effective, and I think they definitely did. The show is impactful when it needs to be, it's disturbing when it needs to be, it's occasionally weird, and it's occasionally beautiful. To give you a couple of examples, everything that happens in China in the flashbacks is crucial and done really well. Those were actually some of my favorite parts of the series. Also, the big scene revolving around a ship called Judgment Day, you'll know it when you see it. Excellent. No notes. That episode in general, in my opinion, was the best of the entire season. There's another major moment that happens at the end of that episode that really lands dramatically, and demonstrates how high the stakes are and how big the problem is that they're trying to deal with. It's a real oh shit moment, and it's great. I also loved some of the casting. The two actresses playing Ye Wen-chie really delivered, and even though we're seeing this character at very different points in her life and she changes quite a bit, you can still tell that this is the same person and you understand why she made the decisions that she made. Jonathan Pryce, who plays the older version of Mike Evans, is great, and it's interesting to see him portray a character that shares some similarities with the High Sparrow, his character in Game of Thrones. Which, by the way, there are a few more Game of Thrones actors in this series, so that's fun. Benedict Wong as Da Shou was absolutely perfect casting. His character is this kind of grumpy, down-to-earth intelligence officer who is trying to figure out what's going on with these deaths of scientists. He's one of the main characters, and Benedict Wong really fits the role so well. But my two favorite characters and actors so far are Jess Hong as Jin Chang and Liam Cunningham as Wade. The two couldn't be more different, and that makes the dynamic between them really fun. Jin Chang is one of 5 scientists the series focuses on as main characters, and out of those 5, she is the most well-rounded as far as the writing goes. She's smart, she's driven, she has a very distinct personality, and she's also compassionate and loyal. She wants to make the choices that make the most sense logically, but sometimes those things are in conflict with what she believes is right from the human perspective. Wade, on the other hand, he is the guy who gets things done, and he will set morals and emotions aside to get the results he needs. He's effective, and considering the threat these people are facing, he is the right guy for the job, even though to many he will not be a likable guy. Quite the change from Sir Davos for Liam Cunningham. Finally, the show does successfully introduce some concepts from the books that most people will find fascinating and love. The thing is, the very basic premise and character motivations of Three Body Problem aren't all that revolutionary, but what the story does with that basic setup is really cool. This is how I felt about the first book in the series, which, if I'm being honest, blew my mind multiple times. And to an extent, the same can be said about the first season of the show. It is ambitious and thought-provoking, although it's definitely a very abridged version of the novel. This is where I'm going to get into my issues with the Netflix series, so get ready. First of all, a lot is sacrificed for the sake of pacing, even though it does eventually get more layered and interesting. To put it simply, I don't think they gave the story enough room to breathe, which is exactly the issue the last few seasons of Game of Thrones had. And I'm sorry I keep bringing up Game of Thrones, but I'm recognizing this approach to adapting dense material, and I am seeing this trend of misunderstanding what made the source material so popular to begin with. That being said, I don't think it's as bad as the final seasons of Game of Thrones, but it's not amazing either, and it just makes me concerned about how they're going to be able to handle the increasingly complex nature of the rest of the series. Look, I'm not saying that they need to sit there and explain science like the books do, though the books do it very successfully, but I also think there was a happy medium between the books and what we ended up getting in the show. The first novel gives you cultural and political context, a pretty layered, almost religious angle, plenty of fictional ideas deeply rooted in science, a concept of an alien invasion done differently, an interesting use of a video game element, different opinions on the nature of human existence, and while most of that is still somewhat present in the show, almost none of it is properly explored or given enough attention. It's all just checkpoints on the plot line. It's simplified to a point of almost feeling shallow, which is shocking because the books are anything but that. This show also made me realize once again how much I dislike compressed timelines and adaptations. Going back to not having enough room to breathe, all of the present day stuff feels like it happens in the span of a couple of months, and I think that's actually the implication here, correct me if I'm wrong. But considering that they're not only going over the three body problem, but also dipping into the Dark Forest, which is the second book in the series, and I don't think they should have touched that this season, all of the present day stuff should be taking years. It feels like chaos. It's the chaotic era, guys. And sometimes chaos can be a good thing in film and TV storytelling, but in this case, it just feels like they're trying to bombard you with events and people are coming up with knee-jerk solutions to big problems. This also doesn't allow you to really get invested in the characters, with a few exceptions. Oh, the characters. The characters are a whole problem of its own. The cast is a lot more international than it is in the first novel, and the present day setting is mostly Oxford. They wanted to make sure the series has international appeal, and your mileage may vary on these changes, but the way they actually write these characters, it's not great. You have 5 scientists at the center of the story, the Oxford Five, who are partly inspired by characters in the books, including later books, and partly are taking on some of the functions of the main character from the first book, Wang Miao, who is not in the show at all. The closest character to him is August Salazar, played by Isa Gonzalez. The problem is that they're trying to write these characters in where they don't belong and give them things to do while also splitting one character into 5, and the result is that, except for Jin Cheng, who I talked about earlier, all of these characters are extremely flat and one-dimensional. They did not know how to write them well. Now, it is true that the characters are not the strongest aspect of the novel. It's hard sci-fi, and so you're going to have a lot of characters whose main function is to deliver ideas or to move the plot along. But they're not flat either. They still feel like people, and this aspect of the novel never really bothered me. You just don't care for them as much as you would for characters in a more character-driven story. But these characters in the show, they are so paper thin that I occasionally wondered why some of them were there to begin with. I could write a whole essay about these characters and what's wrong with them, how their entire personalities boil down to one trait, how they don't feel like real people, how some of them are given this unnecessary romantic tension that just didn't need to happen. But let's talk about our main Wang Miao stand-in, Augie, who just comes off as annoying. Most of the time she's upset, angry, or pouting, which are very interchangeable expressions on the actress's face for some reason. I have nothing against Isa Gonzalez, by the way. I liked her a lot in other roles. I just think she is extremely miscast here, and the writing for her character is not doing her any favors. Now, if we had one character like we do in the book instead of a group, this would have created some dimension, some inner conflict, and some much needed focus. This story did not need more characters. It needed more development. After finishing episode 6, I wrote in my notes that I can't remember most of these characters' names, and that tells you a lot about how interesting they are. I also don't think they should have dipped into book 2 and even book 3 the way they did. They should have spent that time working out the details covered in book 1, expanding on ideas, and at the very least, writing better characters if they were that determined to make it into a group. This decision of going with a group of characters comes at the expense of world building and creates a domino effect of small changes, making the story feel messy. There are subplots that come up and disappear within 1 to 2 episodes, and instead of getting deeper into the politics or the the science or the aliens or the pro-alien organization that is frustratingly simplified into a cult here. We spend time on a group of flat characters. They cut substance and filled it with nothing because even when it comes to character motivations, they aren't always clear. There's also something to be said about westernizing the story as much as they did, and that is going to be something people disagree on. I personally would have preferred them to retain more of the Chinese essence and cultural aspects of the story, and I think that does play into why the novels are so interesting. It's good to see a different perspective and to discuss issues from a different angle. But then again, it's not like the series gives you time to sit with anything. The minute any kind of interesting question comes up, the show gives you an immediate answer. Why? Because they don't trust their audience and they care much more about the thriller aspects of it than they do for the hard sci-fi, and that's disappointing. Here's what I think. Benioff and Weiss once again bit off more than they could chew with this. Because of how brilliant the source material is, it's still going to be good and interesting to watch in this condensed, simplified version, but unless they revise their approach to how they're doing it, Three Body Problem is not going to reach its potential of being one of the best sci-fi shows ever made. To me, this first season is the definition of good enough, which some people will be happy with, but personally, I'm tired of settling for good enough when occasionally we do get to see that it is possible to adapt complex source material and do it justice. Is it terrible? No, absolutely not. It's enjoyable, it's high production value sci-fi, it's going places, it's high stakes, it's large scope and scale, it asks interesting questions, but is it great? Sadly, no. And I can't help feeling disappointed, even though it's still pretty good and does eventually deliver some beautiful moments, some horrifying moments, some epic moments, but it also misses the mark in many ways. And at the end of the day, knowing what's to come from the books was a big part of what kept me going as I was watching the series. I wanted to know how they were going to show certain things. Some did leave me satisfied. Others made me think, wait, that's it? I will still be watching season 2 if and when that comes out with tempered expectations. But was pretty good the reaction I was hoping I'd have after watching season 1? Come on, of course not. Were you?